a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership association, 88,000 strong in North Dakota, creating real possibilities right here in North Dakota, and by the members of Prairie Public.
Good evening and welcome to continuing coverage of the 2018 elections on Prairie Public, and thanks also to AARP. I'm Dave Thompson. This evening we're going to hear a debate between the candidates for North Dakota's lone U.S. House seat. They are Republican Kelly Armstrong from Dickinson and Democrat Max Schneider from Fargo. Thank you both for participating. We flipped a coin before this broadcast, and Kelly Armstrong will begin with 90 seconds of opening comment.
Well, I'd like to say thanks to the AARP and Prairie Public. And I think today, more than most days, it's important to recognize and say thank you to all the men and women in uniform across the state and across the country. North Dakota is proud of what we produce. We provide the country and the world with food, oil, gas, and electricity. And I'm excited to go to work for North Dakota in Washington, D.C. And I will do so carrying one simple message, and that is what is good for North Dakota is good for the country. And make no mistake, the distinction between Mac and I could not be more clear. He's on record opposing the Trump tax cuts which have benefited North Dakota more than any other state in the country. And the reason they've benefited North Dakota the most is because of sound tax policy that we have passed in the state legislature. Tax cuts which I am proud to support and which Mac has opposed at every turn. And I will work with the Trump administration to continue to roll back federal regulations that stifle our growing economy. And no matter how much he tries to cozy up to President Trump right now, it's important to remember that in 2016, he gave Hillary Clinton $5,000. She campaigned for president on shutting down the coal industry in North Dakota. We need to continue to roll back federal regulations to allow North Dakota farmers, ranchers, small businesses, and energy producers to thrive. Thank you for having me, and we'll move forward.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to hear from the Democratic candidate, Max Schneider.
Dave, thanks so much for agreeing to moderate this debate. I want to thank the AARP, Prairie Public, and my friend Kelly Armstrong for agreeing to participate tonight during this day of national remembrance. Throughout the course of this campaign, during this very politically polarized time in our country, I've tried to focus my campaign on the issues that North Dakotans talk about around their kitchen tables. Things like jobs, education, health care, access to a secure retirement. And on those issues, I'll work with President Trump, Republicans in Congress, Democrats, and everybody in between to make sure that our state is effectively represented. But I'll also stand up against policies that hurt our state. And on those kitchen table issues that I just mentioned, there's a big difference between me and my opponent. Let's talk about jobs. You can't talk jobs in North Dakota unless you talk family farming. When we were in the state Senate together, my opponent voted to expand corporate farming in North Dakota. I voted against that, and so did 76% of North Dakota voters. Now my opponent supports policies that have led to a trade war. I've opposed those policies since day one because I see them for what they are, and that's a threat to North Dakota agriculture and to family farmers. Or take health care. I was proud to join with Governor Jack Dalrymple and Republicans in Congress to expand Medicaid. My opponent voted against that, and now he supports a lawsuit down in Texas that threatens not just Medicaid expansion in North Dakota, but also threatens to undo protections for individuals with pre-existing conditions. North Dakota's only got one member of Congress, and our state's interests don't always align with one party or the other. Neither should North Dakota's member of the U.S. House. I'll work with both parties, and I'll always put North Dakota first.
Thank you both very much. The first question will go to Max Schneider, and we're going to talk about tariffs and the impact toward farmers especially. Soybean farmers have been really concerned about the tariffs, and they're imposed by the current administration. Number one, what do you think about tariffs, and what do you think about the bailout that has been proposed by the administration?
I have consistently opposed the administration's trade policies because I understand what they are, and that's a threat to our export markets, a threat to the profitability of family farmers in our state, and really a threat to North Dakota's economy. On the other hand, my opponent has supported the administration's trade policies, and I, for the life of me, can't understand why someone seeking to represent North Dakota in Congress would do something like that. It's been around 11 weeks since there's been an order for soybeans out of the Pacific Northwest That has created tremendous uncertainty, drops in prices in the commodity markets, soybeans in particular. And there's this notion out there that maybe this is short-term pain for long-term gain. Well, I see it as short-term pain for long-term pain. Short-term pain in the form of lower prices, long-term pain in the form of loss of markets. Of course, I support the aid package. If it provides any assistance to North Dakota farmers and helps them stay on the land, I'm for it. But within that package, there needs to be improvements. There's a regional difference when it comes to basis. North Dakota producers, they pay essentially a penalty for where we're located in the country, especially when we lose those orders out of the Pacific Northwest. The USDA needs to make adjustments to make sure that North Dakota soybean growers and others are fairly compensated. You look at the amount that's going to corn growers in North Dakota, that's about 1 cent a bushel for half the crop. That doesn't make a lot of sense either. But it all starts with these trade policies that my opponent supports that have really just tanked our markets. That is the wrong approach, and as North Dakota's member of Congress, I'll stand up for our family farmers.
And a response from Kelly Armstrong.
Yeah, that's not true. I've been on record since the beginning of this campaign saying North Dakota is a commodity-based economy and tariffs do not benefit North Dakota. What I will say is I support the administration for working to negotiate better trade deals for not just this generation, but future generations. And we've been in this issue, and now it's time to get it done. And we cannot wait until January when we get sworn in to do it. We've been talking to administration officials throughout this campaign. We will continue to talk to them the day after the election. But we need to get secured trade deals. We need a farm bill to pass. We need whatever they're going to call the new NAFTA to pass soon. And we need to continue to work for better trade deals, and these deals have to be taken care of quickly. But we don't just have to put pressure on the administration. We also have to work in the realities that exist. And one of those is we have the highest consumer index, or the highest small business confidence index we've had ever right now. 6.9 open jobs. Wage growth is as good as it's been in over a decade. Unemployment's as low as it's been in a decade, and the stock market is raising really high. And none of that matters to a hill of beans to a North Dakota Red River Valley farmer, but it does matter to other members of Congress who aren't seeing the detriments of these trade policies right now because the rest of the economy is working. So what we have to do is we got to get to D.C., we have to work with those members and make them understand that even if they aren't feeling the pain we're feeling in North Dakota right now, real pain is coming in the next 18 to 36 months, and we need to build a coalition to put pressure on the administration to negotiate better trade deals, but to get these deals done quickly.
Max Schneider, you have a response?
I do. Check the record, please. You have supported the administration's trade policies. You said it on KVLY. You were quoted in the Associated Press, the Grand Forks Herald. You supported the administration's trade policies. Now that they're unpopular, now that they've tanked our soybean markets and threatened access to export markets for our producers, my opponent's changing his tune. North Dakota's member of Congress, our state can't afford to have that person speak out of both sides of his mouth on trade. Yes, I recognize that China is a cheater, that they manipulate their currency, that they steal our intellectual property, but our farmers shouldn't have to pay for that. Let's recalibrate these trade policies. Let's get shoulder to shoulder with our allies, go after China with Canada, with Mexico, with the EU. They've been affected by China's cheating as well. But let's not put our farmers and ranchers in harm's way. My opponent earlier in the campaign was willing to do that, and he's changed his tune here tonight.
Kelly Armstrong, you have the last word on this.
Well, I'll say a couple things. One, I have said since day one that tariffs are not a solution for the North Dakota economy. I've said that since the day we started this campaign, and I will continue to say it now. And the other answer to a lot of this is these same go-together things. We've won 19 WTO cases against China in a row. And you know what China does? They pay the ticket because it's cheaper than complying with this. I agree with negotiating better trade deals, but we need to understand how high the stakes are for North Dakota right now, not over short-term pain and long-term gain. We need the administration and other members of Congress to understand that not only is this bad for North Dakota as it continues, but it will be bad for the rest of the economy in the future.
I have a follow-up question since we've been talking a lot about foreign policy. Right now there is, of course, a debate as the time is ticking on the Farm Bill. So again, I'll start with Max Schneider. If you were in Congress, what kind of farm bill would you like to see?
Well, I was at Big Iron, the farm show here in Cass County this morning out at the fairgrounds, and it's clear that our producers are dealing with uncertainty. Uncertainty in terms of low commodity prices, uncertainty because of the trade policies that my opponent supports, just uncertainty all around. And if we can, through the political process, provide some certainty in terms of getting a farm bill in place by September 30th, we need to work on a bipartisan basis to do that. Unfortunately, what you've seen coming out of Congress in the two chambers, it really is a tale of the House versus the Senate. The House passed out an extraordinarily partisan bill, hung up over these work requirements that our neighboring Congressman Colin Peterson has described as a hassle factor, really rather than a legitimate way to encourage people to work. We need to set ideology aside because that really threatens the Farm Bill. On the Senate side, on the other hand, you had 86 votes in the Senate for that bipartisan bill. That's historically how we've gotten farm bills passed. And so we need to make sure that we put those ideological fights aside, get a farm bill passed by September 30th, and that requires setting aside politics. When it comes to the substance, we need good crop insurance. We should be raising reference prices to make sure that we're compensating our producers during these times of record low prices. But that all starts with putting politics aside and getting down to the brass tacks and passing a farm bill ahead of September 30th to provide some certainty for our producers and family farmers.
And Kelly Armstrong, your response.
Yeah, I think I'm probably the only one on stage that would vote for either version of the Farm Bill tomorrow, with what's in it, and that's because of the important safety nets that exist in both bills for both our farmers and ranchers in North Dakota. But I think we talk a lot about the House bill and how it's, and you'd like to point out that it's partisan. Two things to that. One, it sounds like they are working towards a negotiated agreement on the food stamps. And two, there are things in the House version of the Farm Bill that are better for North Dakota producers than the Senate bill. There's a better cushion for our electric co-ops, which allows access to capital at a lower rate. There's more rollbacks of waters of the U.S. and federal regulation that chokes off our farmers and ranchers, and they don't have the permanent easements that the Senate version of the Farm Bill goes. So there are things from both bills that are better, but we need, at the end of the day, what we need to do is move this bill forward and get it passed as soon as possible. Neither one is probably going to be perfect, but the good of either bill far outweighs the bad.
This next question will go to Kelly Armstrong first, and we did talk about Obamacare in some of the opening statements. The state of North Dakota has joined this lawsuit in Texas about Obamacare, which could mean the end of Obamacare. And there are some North Dakotans who are concerned about coverage. And the mantra among the majority has been to repeal and replace Obamacare. So my question to you, Kelly Armstrong, is what about Obamacare and what about repealing and replacing it?
Yeah, Obamacare first started to try and solve a problem in North Dakota that didn't exist prior to its inception. Prior to Obamacare's inception, 8 to 10% of the population was uninsured. After Obamacare's inception, 8 to 10% of the population is uninsured. And at the same time, costs have continued to rise on our businesses and our private market insured. And we continue to work forward with providers have left the markets, costs have gone up at a drastic rate, and we move forward, and the costs just continue to skyrocket. And the programs that were in place, like Graham Cassidy and things of that nature, they were very specific, and they benefited states like North Dakota better than anybody else. As the bill was originally written from Republicans, that under Obamacare, North Dakota got about $3.5 billion from 2020 to 2026. Under the block grant program, we'd get $4.26 billion. That's an increase of $700 million with significantly less strings attached. And the state of North Dakota alone would save over $370 million over that time period. These are programs that work well in North Dakota. And there was a 2-year grace period to allow nothing in Medicaid expansion in those programs to change while we implemented our own program. And we simply put, both parties in D.C. have failed at providing health insurance. And it's no secret that the two biggest places we have insurance problems in North Dakota are with health insurance and flood insurance. And those are the only two that don't have a significant state regulatory body. We need to get the decisions out of D.C. I trust John Gottfried and Governor Burgum, especially if they're getting more money with less strings attached, to make health care decisions for the population in North Dakota. And as we continue to work forward, and I know my opponent's going to bring up Medicaid expansion because I voted against it. And the reason I voted against it is because we are dealing with a situation, and the liberal politics of insurance ignore the economic and medical realities that without significant reform, we are not going to be able to provide the medical coverage that our citizens need.
Max Schneider, your response.
The question was about a lawsuit down in Texas, a lawsuit that my opponent supports, that now seeks to rip away protections for individuals with pre-existing conditions here in North Dakota and across the country. That is absolutely the wrong way to go about healthcare policy. My opponent and I are lawyers. I personally believe you don't have to sue about everything. What we should be doing when it comes to health care is keeping what works, those protections for individuals with pre-existing conditions. That's on the books right now. Don't ask a judge down in Texas to throw out those protections. Let's build upon those health care gains and then fix what's broken. Another problem with my opponent's support for that lawsuit, it would rip away coverage from an estimated 47,000 North Dakotans. That's the 20,000 that gained access to health insurance under Medicaid expansion. You can just about imagine what that would do to rural hospitals. It's about 20,000 that gained access to health insurance through the exchanges, and about 7,000 young people who are on their parents' policies. What are those people going to do when my opponent gets his way, when the judge rules his way down in Texas? What are they going to do for health insurance? My opponent has no answers for that. And respectfully, you can talk about Graham Cassidy all you want, but if that was a good bill, the Republican-controlled Congress would have passed it. The fact of the matter is, caps Medicaid payments, which would be a disaster for our long-term care facilities here in North Dakota, and obviously it wasn't the right thing to do, or else the Republican-controlled Congress would have enacted it into law. I am going to mention Medicaid expansion. I'm not sure the liberal politics of insurance really appeals or applies to Medicaid expansion. It was supported by Governor Dalrymple. It was supported by your colleagues in the Republican caucuses in the House and the Senate. And I was proud to join with them to expand Medicaid because it helped keep rural hospitals open. All of that is threatened by this lawsuit down in Texas that my opponent supports. Let's not sue about it. Let's work on a bipartisan basis to build on the gains that we have and fix what's broken. These individual insurance markets where people are paying far too much for health insurance.
Kelly Armstrong, your response.
Well, a couple things about the lawsuit. One, and my opponent has said it is Commerce Clause 101, but I think it's important to remember that when Obamacare was originally challenged at the Supreme Court, the Commerce Clause was rejected as an argument for implementing it. The only reason it was implemented is because the individual mandate existed, what was qualified as a tax. And with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that was passed, the penalty for that individual mandate went away. So now the constitutionality of Obamacare is in question. And it still doesn't change the fact that since the implementation of Obamacare, again, I'm glad more people are covered under Medicaid expansion, but we aren't covering more people in total in North Dakota. We are not doing it. We have not done it, and the costs in the private market continue to raise. So everybody who's covered under Medicaid expansion, I'm glad they're covered, but we aren't covering more people, and we're pushing the cost off onto our businesses and onto Main Street and onto people who don't qualify for Medicaid expansion but cannot pay for the rising costs. However this turns out, significant reform is important to healthcare because the long-term viability of it is unsustainable at the current level.
Max Schneider has the last word on this.
We can nerd out all we want about constitutional law, but the fact of the matter is there are people in North Dakota who depend on those protections for individuals with pre-existing conditions. I spent an afternoon together with a friend of mine, Jolene from Grand Forks. She's been battling Parkinson's since 2002. What is she supposed to do about her health insurance if this case declares those protections unconstitutional? And the fact of the matter is there's nothing unconstitutional about protecting individuals with pre-existing conditions. That standalone policy is absolutely constitutional. And so why my opponent would support this ideological lawsuit when it's a direct threat to the health care of so many North Dakotans is beyond me. That is not what a responsible candidate for Congress does.
The next question I have, we'll start with Max Schneider. There appears, to be a lot of roadblocks to bipartisan cooperation in the House. It's very, very, in some cases, probably hyper-partisan. What are the roadblocks and how do you remove them?
I think what we need to do in this country is just set aside ideology, and that really begins with electing people who are willing to work with both parties. If you look at the composition of the House of Representatives right now, you have deeply liberal members from left-wing districts, you have deeply conservative members from right-wing districts. And that creates an environment where not only is there no incentive to compromise, there's also a disincentive to compromise because people are worried about getting beat in re-election by somebody who's more extreme than them. And so we need to start electing people who are going to work with either party, both parties, President Trump, whoever future administrations may be, to advocate for the best interest of North Dakota. We've only got 1 out of 435 members in that chaotic body. If that person isn't setting aside ideology, recognizing these partisan lawsuits for what they are, recognizing trade policies for what they are, and working together with other affected parties regardless of partisanship to advance our country, that job's not going to get done for North Dakota. And so I really think it comes to building relationships and electing people who are willing to work with both parties rather than just charge to the extremes like we've seen over the last decade in this country.
To Kelly Armstrong, your response.
Yeah, I appreciate the question because I think the key is you have to be able to stand on principle when it matters, and when the cause and of North Dakota citizens is served. You have to be able to build coalitions and work with anyone and everyone. And I have a proven record of doing that in North Dakota. I can stand on principle on issues that we have big disagreements between the party. And as soon as that vote is over, I can walk over to somebody else's desk and work on things that are moving forward. I did it for the surge funding bill, which brought $1.3 billion in infrastructure to people all across the state. It's not an easy task to necessarily get Eastern legislators from either party to support a bill where a lot of that money is going to infrastructure in the West. And I was proud to lead the charge on DUI reform and criminal justice reform. And while we moved those through the legislature and we got significant reform, which is not only good policy, but it's actually going to help change and save lives. When you sit in a room with defense attorneys, prosecutors, local sheriffs, Republicans, Democrats, counties, cities, different areas, to get all of those people on the same page to make significant reform in North Dakota is not an easy task. I'm proud of my record of coalition building when it matters in North Dakota, and I will continue to do that in Washington, D.C.
As a follow-up question, I'm going to start with you, Kelly Armstrong. Is it wise to commit to 100% loyalty to a party, and how would you handle that in Washington?
It's absolutely not wise to commit to 100% loyalty to anybody, and I'm proud of my record as well. It's easy for Mac and I to fight. It's easy to fight with Democrats. It's a lot harder when you're the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee to take on the Republican-controlled land department on an issue that you think is wrong. And I've proven before I've done that. I mean, Wayne Stenjum's my friend. Doug Burgum's my friend. Rich Wardner's my friend and mentor. But I have never, ever shied away from taking on members of my own party when I thought it was best for North Dakota citizens. And you have to be able to continue to do that. At the same time, you have to be able to build coalitions with other rural representatives, whether they're Democrats or Republican, because in Congress, more than anything else, consuming states are significantly more represented than producing states. So you have to be able to advocate for issues that are important to rural America, but more importantly, you have to advocate in a way that's effective and convince urban legislators that what we're asking for is important to them as well.
To Mac Schneider.
Yeah, I believe very strongly that there needs to be change in Washington, and I'm not afraid to say that there needs to be some change in my own party as well. I'm very proud of my record standing up for energy development in North Dakota. I was a member of Energy Blue, which is a group of pro-energy Democrats. Very proud of my record on the Second Amendment and supporting jobs throughout North Dakota, even when it might be anathema to some national politicians out in Washington, D.C. That said, we have not seen my opponent stand up to his own party on those issues that are so important to North Dakotans. Trade, the tariff policies that are hurting North Dakota farmers. The health care issues that I mentioned. North Dakota's member of Congress can't just talk about setting aside politics. They've got to do it. And this is a race for Congress where one person has shown they're willing to stand up for North Dakota. I intend to do that if I'm fortunate enough to get this job. And one person is going to stand loyally with the administration, even on policies that hurt North Dakota, like trade and health care.
Kelly Armstrong, your response.
That argument would be better if it was true, but past performance is the best indicator of future result. And I have worked hard with each members of both parties in North Dakota to get some of the most substantial legislation in a generation passed. And to say that there's a bipartisan agreement on this side of the aisle, I mean, no offense, Mac, but you were not a bipartisan moderate in the North Dakota Senate. You were a partisan Democrat. And on big issues that were important in North Dakota, we worked forward and we passed issues that I think have benefited North Dakota significantly. And I have taken on members of my own party right here at home, and I have no problem doing that in Washington, D.C. There's two different kinds of people who do this. You can kick dirt, you can scream, you can pound on the podium, and that makes for good politics, but it doesn't really do much to persuade people. And we are in contact with people every day talking about the issues that are important in North Dakota, whether it's trade, whether it's tax cuts, whether it's regulation. We're on those things on a constant basis, and we'll continue to work forward to that. If anybody thinks I won't stick up for North Dakota before either party when I think it's bad for North Dakota, that is just simply not the case, and I have a record that proves that.
Can I get one final word in on that?
Yes.
Let's get real here, though. You and I have worked together in the state Senate on a lot of things that are very important. Battling human trafficking, changing laws to protect women and children. Those are issues where we have worked together, right? In the legislatures, there's a bipartisan record that we both share. In this race for Congress, I've shown that I'm willing to stand up to Nancy Pelosi. I don't intend to vote for her. I think we need change within the Democratic Party. I think we need to go back to an economic message that makes sense right here in the heartland. My opponent has not shown.
You're not going to vote for her?
I'm not going to vote for her. I'm going to vote for somebody else. I'm going to vote whoever is best for North Dakota. That's who I'm going to vote for.
At that point, let's move on to our next question. This is from AARP, our partners, and we start with Mac Schneider. Medicare today provides benefits to 60 million older adults and people with disabilities, including over 115,000 North Dakotans. How will you work to preserve and strengthen Medicare for current seniors and future generations?
Well, in my day job as an attorney, I see every day how important Medicare is. I represent a lot of people who, through no fault of their own, are diagnosed with cancer or have a work-related injury and they can no longer work. And as a result of that, they need access to health care, and oftentimes Medicare is the best option for them. And is a lifeline not just to those individuals that I work with every day, but also North Dakota seniors. And so we need to strengthen that program. That is a guarantee that our citizens here in North Dakota have paid into over the course of decades, and we need to strengthen that program for future generations. What we can do is understand that we need to work to make the program more efficient without cutting benefits. That's working to find ways to pay for performance rather than just the cost of treatment. And those are ways that we can preserve this critical program for future generations. I look forward to working with healthcare providers throughout North Dakota to make sure that we maintain Medicare and also maintain a fair reimbursement rate for our rural hospitals. A lot of our rural hospitals are struggling. I hate to think where they'd be without Medicaid expansion, but Medicare reimbursement rates are absolutely critical, and we've got to keep those rural hospitals open. And so that's an important part of maintaining Medicare for North Dakota as well, and it's just a critical guarantee.
Kelly Armstrong.
We need to continue. One thing we need to work on, and whether it's senior living homes or any of those things, the Medicare rate has not raised. We used to be in the top 40% in it as a state, and now we are in the bottom rung of it. So, and that not only affects people who are in those homes, but it affects bringing people to work in our rural hospitals and things of that nature. But the answer is when we are dealing, whether it's Medicaid or Social Security or any of those issues, there cannot be a reform to any of those packages that affects anybody who is at or anywhere near retirement. But we have to continue to work for those things and work for those reforms so that we can continue to keep these programs solvent and also increasing rates as we move forward so we can be competitive in the health service providers we're bringing into North Dakota.
Okay. Mac Schneider, one more try.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think what we need to do is not just preserve those programs for people who are at or near retirement, but also preserve Medicare for future generations. This is something that has worked since it was enacted in the 1960s. It has certainly worked for North Dakota. We're not just going to save it for the people who are on the cusp of retirement. We're going to save it for North Dakotans of future generations.
Yeah, and I would say that any reform or any change of it if you're making small changes now that benefit in the future, I agree with that. We have to ensure the solvency of the program for future generations.
I want to follow up, and I'll give you each a try of this, Mac. If you think reforms need to be made to Social Security, what would they be?
Well, I think the first thing that when it comes to Social Security is not to be alarmist. You know, even if somehow the trust fund were to be expended, Social Security, the revenue coming in, can still pay the lion's share of benefits. And so what I think we need to do to preserve this program, and again, this is a program that I see the benefits of every day with the hardworking North Dakotans that I represent. This is something that is an insurance benefit that's been paid for through these hardworking individuals' payroll taxes, sometimes over the course of a lifetime, and it's got to be there. But let's go after fraud and abuse where it exists. Let's make sure that this program is there for the people who need it and not being overextended to people who don't need it. But preserve that guaranteed benefit, that secure retirement, that disability insurance that so many North Dakotans rely on. But also, you don't have to be alarmist about it. We can save this program through modest tweaks and bipartisan compromise.
Kelly, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's important as well, is that talking about this as it maintains forward. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is because of great medical advances, people are living longer, they are having healthier lives much longer into their livelihood. But when I was at a meet and greet a couple nights ago, and a couple weeks ago actually in Hillsborough, and I asked everybody under the age of 30 to ask if they believe that Social Security exists when they retire, and it's amazing how many hands don't go up. And so I agree that when you're dealing with these issues, any tweaks or any reforms that are done have to be small and have to be on the front end of the population. One of the things that drives me nuts about Social Security is when it gets called an entitlement. This is not an entitlement. This is something people have paid into their whole life for benefits once they retire and once they reach those age. And we need to recognize that. We need to recognize the people that have paid into it. We need to also be cognizant and ensure that the program will maintain solvency throughout the course of the people who are alive now, so they can benefit from it in the future.
The next question, we'll start with you, Kelly. You have already said you support the tax cuts that were enacted in Congress. Looking back on it now, why do you still support them? Were they good for the economy or were they not?
They were good. Well, they were good for the North Dakota economy. As I've said before, North Dakota benefited more than any other state in the country by these tax cuts, and that's because of the sound tax policies that we've passed in North Dakota, which I was proud to support. But the other answer is if we want to talk about kitchen table issues, you know what a kitchen table issue is when you open your paycheck and you have more money in it. And so you can buy dance lessons for your daughter, or you can buy a new soccer ball for your son or daughter and moving forward. These tax cuts have benefited North Dakota, and we've seen it nationally with the economy. Again, 4.3% growth, stock market at an all-time high, consumer confidence and small business confidence at an all-time high. Wages have grown more than any time in a decade. 6.3 or 6.9 million open jobs right now. We have 30,000 open jobs in North Dakota. And Democrats will complain about the long-term deficit, but one, they're not using the same GDP numbers that we are seeing even right now. And two, I always find it interesting that the one time that the Democrats will argue about a deficit is when we are allowing our hardworking citizens to keep more of their money.
Max Schneider, I don't think you were a fan of tax cuts. Maybe I'm reading you wrong, but what do you think about the tax cuts, and are they good for the economy?
Well, in any large piece of legislation, there's a lot that I support. The doubling of the standard deduction, the tax cuts for the middle class, the deduction on income for small businesses, those are good things. And if we would have stopped there and then maybe closed some additional loopholes that don't make a lot of sense in our tax code, we could have had a bipartisan victory. We could have paid for those tax cuts and made sure that we didn't run up the long-term debt that we're going to have to pass on to our kids. As it stands, a large share of the tax cuts went to corporations that in a lot of cases might not have even been asking for them. And the price is significant. $1.9 trillion. I'm not against tax cuts. I'm against tax cuts that aren't paid for. But if I am elected to represent North Dakota in Congress, I'm going to keep those tax cuts that have benefited the middle class. I'm going to keep those tax cuts that have benefited small businesses. And then we'll also look for ways to balance the budget in the long term. Go after some of these loopholes that don't make a lot of sense. This carried interest loophole that allows hedge fund managers to pay a lower percentage in taxes than my legal assistant does. Let's go after that on a bipartisan basis and balance our budget. We're going to talk about the tax cut being good for the economy. A lot of the gains for manufacturers or for farmers that were gained under those tax cuts, that's been erased by the trade war that came as a result of policies that my opponent has supported. So let's keep that in mind when we're talking about what's good for the economy.
Kelly Armstrong to respond.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how he can say he's not against tax cuts. He hasn't voted for any of them, whether it was capital gains, income taxes at the state legislature, corporate tax level. You've not voted for an income tax cut or a corporate tax cut in North Dakota. Those are the reasons why we have the benefits we have in North Dakota. And we're up to $2,600 per person in our state that is benefiting from these tax cuts. And those are important dollars to regular North Dakota working families. And we've seen it succeed. We've seen Shields, Gate City Bank, they're reinvesting in their communities. They're doing what these tax cuts were intended to do, and they're benefiting the state of North Dakota.
Mac, one more time.
Just to set the record straight here, we're replowing some ground that we covered in the legislature, but I was for cutting the taxes that North Dakotans cared about, property tax relief. Kelly cut every tax under the sun, dramatically increased spending, some of that spending like the surge bill I supported. But I didn't support dramatically cutting corporate taxes and personal income taxes in North Dakota because I was focused on maintaining property tax relief. On Kelly's watch in the North Dakota Senate, that 12% property tax credit that was very popular with homeowners in North Dakota, that's been pared back. So I'm going to take the approach that I took in the North Dakota Senate, which is making sure tax cuts benefit hardworking North Dakotans.
Well, here is a question that actually is following up on this, and I'll start with Max Schneider. How do you balance the budget?
Well, the first thing that we could do, it's a real radical idea, Dave. It's called passing a budget. Our country has not passed an honest-to-goodness budget for around a decade. And so that's the first thing that we do. Return to regular order, go through the normal appropriations process, plan both in the near term and the long term to address our country's fiscal needs, and work to reduce the deficit and then hopefully in the long term pay down some of the national debt. And the fact of the matter is these trillion-dollar deficits, that's no longer a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. Both administrations are guilty of running up red ink. It's a math issue. And so what we need to do is return to regular order, work together as Democrats and Republicans, and solve this problem before it's unsolvable. $1 trillion deficits are just not sustainable, and we need to address that before it becomes a crisis. What we've seen over the past decade, and it's continuing presently, is just passing continuing resolutions, feeding the beast, running up the debt on the national credit card. That's got to change.
To Kelly Armstrong, how does one balance the budget?
There's $23 trillion in national debt, and we do need to continue to pass budget. This might be something we actually agree with to some degree or another, but there's hope because the Senate has started passing budgets. They've been moving forward. But I think it's important to remember last quarter we collected more money than at any other time in our history. Washington, D.C. does not have a revenue problem. They have a spending problem. And we need to be able to cut budgets, move ourselves forward, and deal with issues as we keep advancing in technology, whether it's at the state level, local level, and county level. We have to find essential efficiencies in where there are. And one thing we need to do immediately is start looking at all the programs that duplicate services and exist in different areas where we are expending more resources for half the benefit. And also going down that path, as we keep federal agencies within their own lane, allow states to have more control over their own destiny, you will not only see regulations decrease, spending go down, but you will increase efficiencies because then instead of 10 people in a federal bureaucracy that have to stamp red tape on a piece of paper, you'll only have one. So you can deliver the programs cheaper and you can deliver them more efficiently. That's a novel idea with the federal government, but we have to continue to work through it. Because when I'm on the campaign trail, it's heartening and sad at the same time to recognize how many people are actually still paying. I mean, with all the hot button political issues that are around in North Dakota and across the country right now, people are recognizing that this is a $23 trillion problem that we're going to pass on to our kids and our grandkids. And at the very least, then maybe and if none of that works, we need to go work forward for a balanced budget amendment, something I was proud to support in North Dakota. Because when you're only on 2-year election cycles and you are in these districts, this may be the only way to move this forward is if the states tell the federal government enough is enough, and we need to balance the budget.
Max Schneider would like to respond.
Well, when you're in a hole, first thing to do is stop digging. My opponent supports a tax plan that adds $1.9 trillion to the deficit. Again, we could have cut the taxes for middle-class North Dakotans, North Dakota business owners without adding a penny to the debt. And so there's a little inconsistency there when it comes to addressing the debt. But I did find some things to agree with my opponent there. Let's go budget by budget. Let's find efficiencies. Let's cut waste, fraud, and abuse and work together once and for all as Democrats and Republicans to balance this budget because it's not sustainable.
All right, this one goes, Kelly, you have one more chance at this.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, we don't always get to vote for a perfect bill. If we could write our perfect bill, there would be often things we do. And the tax cuts benefited North Dakota significantly, and that's why I supported it.
This next question goes to Kelly Armstrong first. How do you relate the current relationship with allies and with Russia? And also, as a second part, what are your thoughts on the Mueller investigation?
Well, I'll start with the last one first, because this is something I've worked for. You know, I have worked with law enforcement agencies, whether it's U.S. attorneys, the FBI, DOJ, local law enforcement, and I can tell you that most of these people are great people. And I don't like when we are attacking our law enforcement institutions because we can find that there are a few people acting badly. It is no different than any other profession. The vast majority of them are good and some of them are bad. So the Mueller investigation needs to conclude, and we need to allow it to run its course. We have to have confidence in these institutions. It's not just important to any particular political environment, but it's important to our law enforcement, not only at the federal level, but at the state level. That being said, I don't think anybody is disagreeing that Russia is trying to interfere. They're not the only ones, by the way, to interfere in our elections. So we need to do everything we can to ensure that they don't. But we also have to be cognizant of censorship. And these are tough conversations, and we're going to continue. As we continue to move more and more into the digital platform in the 21st century, these are conversations that are going to be had often in the halls of Congress, and we need to work forward towards those things.
Max Schneider?
Well, I think the Mueller investigation should be allowed to lead where it may. I don't think anybody, Democrats or Republicans, should prejudge the results of that investigation. Obviously, it's ongoing. There are court cases that are at least tangentially related to it throughout the country, mainly on the East Coast. But that investigation should be allowed to play out, and hopefully it's resolved sooner rather than later. I would support legislation to protect the special counsel until the investigation has run its course. But let's take a look at the facts once those facts are revealed at the end of the investigation. In terms of our relationship with Russia, it should be clear to any honest observer that they are a foreign adversary. They are out not to get one over on Democrats or Republicans, but to hurt our democratic institutions, to hurt our republic, to hurt our country. That was the entire intent of their involvement in the 2016 election. It wasn't picking sides for the sake of picking sides. It was to undermine American democracy. And Republicans and Democrats need to be standing shoulder to shoulder on that one, because foreign powers, Russia, whoever else, they could be after the next political party, the next election cycle. We've got to be together as Americans on that. Our relationship with our allies, I think, in a lot of cases, they're at an all-time low. Trade with Canada, for instance, so important in North Dakota, multi-billion-dollar proposition each year. To see our trading relationships strained by the administration's trade policies and really some coarse talk with our ally, Canada, that's just a real disappointment. I think we should work to shore up that relationship because they're a good ally and they're a strong trading partner.
Well, I'd like to follow up, Kelly, just to ask you this question. Are you nervous about President Trump's relationship with Russia?
You know, the one thing I haven't got asked a whole lot on the campaign trail is that, but no, I mean, I think we need to ensure that Russia is an adversary, and I'm glad Democrats are getting in the game, because Republicans have been complaining about Russia since the end of World War II, and it seems like Democrats have come on board in 2016. But I agree, we need to let this thing follow through, and I think that's one of the problems we run into right now, Dave. We know there's interference. And not just from Russia. We know there's interference from China and other countries. But what ends up happening is the rhetoric from the left turns into collusion immediately. And again, that's putting a cart before a horse, and we need to allow those administrations to go. Regardless of those information, we have to work to keep their interference out of our election system and out of what's going on in North Dakota.
Max Schneider?
I would be concerned if any administration were friendlier to Russia than they are to allies like Canada. I don't mean to personalize it in the sense of our current president, but we need to remember who our friends are, remember who our adversaries are, and act accordingly. I don't think it's entirely appropriate to have a close relationship with Russia without resolving what they've done to interfere with our institutions. Obviously, we're always going to talk to our adversaries. I support the administration speaking with vile dictatorships like North Korea. We should talk to our adversaries, but let's remember who our friends are and who our adversaries are.
And this is another foreign policy type question, but Congress will have to weigh in, of course. This is from Max Schneider first. Was it a mistake to end the Iranian nuclear deal?
I would have liked to have seen us strengthen that deal. The deal was not perfect by any means, but let's build upon what existed there, make it better, make it tougher, join with our allies to make it enforceable and ensure that Iran isn't cheating. Iran is the adversary of adversaries. They have put our soldiers in harm's way, taken just terrible steps against our armed forces. Their government is not friendly to the United States, to put it lightly. They are a true adversary. But let's work to make sure that we can put them in check rather than just checking out. I strongly believe we should have built upon that agreement in place, working with the international community to make sure that Iran couldn't wiggle out of it. Now they're free to turn to others rather than having the international regime against them.
To Kelly Armstrong.
Yes, it was right to get out of the Iran deal. We were rewarding the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the entire world with billions of dollars on the front end with promises on the back end. And when we want to talk about our allies, we don't have to look very far, because our allies in Israel agree with us. And if anybody understands what is going on the ground in the Middle East, it is our allies in Israel. And moving forward and continuing to treat Iran like the terrorist regime it is the appropriate way for the United States to deal with them.
Do you have another response?
Well, take a look at North Korea. I mean, nobody likes North Korea. As I mentioned, they're a vile dictatorship. I think Iran falls into the same phylum when it comes to adversaries in the world. But the president, very rightly, in my opinion, has engaged North Korea, not because we like them, but because we want to prevent war from breaking out and prevent their capacities from increasing and hopefully move towards denuclearization. I think we need to be smart and tough, as the president says, and that applies to not just North Korea, but to Iran and other adversaries.
Kelly Armstrong?
Yeah, I'll just say that working with North Korea, if anybody remembers where we were 24 months ago, we were talking about missile tests that were going to reach U.S. territory. So I appreciate what the president is doing in North Korea and working that forward. But we haven't seen a really bad deal in place with state-sponsored terrorism, which was the result of the Iran deal.
I think they just killed somebody with poison gas at a Malaysian airport. If that's not state-sponsored terror, I'm not sure what is.
All right, let's go back to a domestic issue, and I'll start with Kelly Armstrong on this one. There was a lot of hoopla to begin with about infrastructure needs, roads, bridges, other infrastructure, including broadband internet. But so far, we don't have a plan. So what has to happen?
Republicans and Democrats, I think, all agree that we need an infrastructure package. It is clearly an area where we are being left behind by other countries. North Dakota can be a model for rural broadband. We have some of the best rural broadband in the entire country. The issue is how to pay for it. And that's where the questions come. You know, ideas like public-private partnerships don't work particularly well in North Dakota because we aren't a large enough base economy to deal with those things. Now, we don't just drive on our own roads. We drive on everybody else's roads as well. But as we're working through that. Also, when they talk about raising the gas tax, that is another issue that significantly detrimentally impacts North Dakota more than other states. We drive more vehicle miles, I think, per person than any other state in the country. And the reality is the jobs and the businesses we have here lend themselves to pickup trucks, and whether it's farming, ranching, oil and gas production, and things of those nature. So we don't want to see a program that significantly disproportionately impacts North Dakota, but we need infrastructure spending. I'll go back to what I said originally. In the last quarter, the U.S. has collected more money than we have at any point in time in our history. We have infrastructure problems in the United States, and it's time for Democrats and Republicans to get together to find a solution.
Max Schneider.
I think there's a real opportunity at the outset of the Trump administration to come together on a bipartisan basis and invest in infrastructure in the country. I think the country would rally around that as Democrats and Republicans. It doesn't matter which member of Congress, there are roads and bridges in every district. And so I still hope the president will lead that effort. And certainly there are many members of Congress who would be a part of that on a bipartisan basis. I'm glad you mentioned broadband. That is the infrastructure of the 21st century. I spoke not too long ago to the rural telecoms, and they're doing a fantastic job working with the private sector, working with their members, working with USDA Rural Development and the Rural Utilities Service to leverage grants and loans. And rural North Dakota has some of the fastest internet in the state, sometimes faster than Fargo and Grand Forks. And so that's important infrastructure. We need to build on those successes. You can't talk about infrastructure in North Dakota unless you're going to talk about Fargo flood protection. I was proud back when I was in the state Senate to cast my vote in favor of that key early funding for Fargo flood protection. My opponent voted against that. If I'm fortunate enough to be elected to represent North Dakota in Congress, I'm going to fight for infrastructure like Fargo flood protection and, of course, Minot and Souris River Basin flood protection as well. Those are two critical projects.
Give Kelly Armstrong a chance to respond.
Yeah, that's not true either. I voted for the bill that protected Fargo. What we were talking about was an amendment that was ensuring the federal government was a willing partner, both structurally and financially, to move this thing forward. I've always supported flood protection for Fargo. I was happy to carry intercity flood protection on the floor of the Senate in 2015, the same year I was carrying the surge funding bill. And the reason is while the diversion is moving forward, we have to continue to protect these areas in eastern North Dakota. The diversion process is permitted. Quite frankly, it's in the hands of the Minnesota DNR right now. Moving forward, as we get to D.C., we have to ensure we fight for every available dollar for the project when it's approved, because we cannot allow that to be that cost to be borne solely on the taxpayers in Cass County and the state of North Dakota. So we have to advocate every day for federal funding for not only that project, but the flood protection in Minot as well. I mean, these communities that's the lifeblood of the north central part of the state, and Fargo is obviously the largest economic driver of any city in the state of North Dakota. It's incredibly important that they have permanent flood protection.
And Max Schneider one more time.
I have an old copy of the Fargo Forum from earlier this year that you can read if you want to refresh your memory on where you stood on Fargo flood protection in 2013, my friend. I was there working to make sure that we put that critical down payment on that project forward. Busloads of leaders from Fargo came in. You were on the other side. I was proud to vote for it. I'm going to keep advocating for Fargo while also mitigating those upstream impacts. That's an important part of the project, too.
I want to move on to one more issue, and I'll start with Max Schneider on this. Immigration seems to be a big roadblock in Congress right now. What needs to happen for an immigration policy?
Well, our immigration system in this country is completely broken. And I think you need to deal with both illegal immigration and legal, capital L, legal immigration as well. First thing we do, let's secure our border. Let's put whatever barriers we need in place, whatever walls we need in place, but let's also understand that a simple barrier is not going to do it. Let's also invest in law enforcement. Let's invest in technology like UAS, the kind that we're so good at developing here in North Dakota. And let's also go after the demand side on this, making sure that we're going after employers who take advantage of illegal labor and undercut the wages of American workers and undercut honest owners. Let's make sure we're going after demand as well. And then we need to look at the root of the problem. Some of the waves of immigration that are occurring, they're coming from Central America because people are fleeing some pretty horrific circumstances. We need to work diplomatically to make sure that we address the root of that problem as well. So it isn't as simple as any one thing, but when it comes to securing the border, I'm absolutely for it. That's a matter of national sovereignty. That's not a matter of cruelty. That said, let's look at fixing our legal immigration system as well. I was talking with the Association of General Contractors, the home builders, and one of their biggest issues, and it's an issue across the board, is workforce. And they're looking at bringing over legal guest workers that will not undercut wages of American workers, but will be here temporarily to partially address some of the workforce needs that we have. We very rightly in North Dakota welcomed legal immigrants from around the globe who are now cardiologists, university professors, outstanding members of our community and true North Dakotans. We need more of that to help solve our workforce needs, but let's make a distinction between legal and illegal immigration.
Kelly Armstrong.
Yeah, my wife is from Oslo, Norway, so nobody's a bigger fan of legal immigration than I am. But this starts and ends with building a wall on the southern border. I've said this on the campaign trail, and I mean it, and it's a fun thing to do because it's true. Fisher Industries in western North Dakota is one of the finalists to build the wall. We have some of the best unmanned aircraft technology in the entire country right here in the Red River Valley. North Dakota could secure the border without the help from any of the other 49 states. We do not have a problem securing the border. We have a problem having the political will to do it. And there's an added benefit to this outside of just curbing the flow of illegal immigration. It also stops the flow of illegal narcotics which cross across the southern border, which do make their way right into the state of North Dakota. And whether heroin and drugs of that, they're killing our young kids. So not only do we stop the flow of illegal immigration, but we stop the flow of illegal drugs, which is a win-win for not only North Dakotans, but everybody across the country. Then we need to get serious about legal immigration. We have 30,000 open jobs in North Dakota. And we have great business climate, we have great communities, but boy, trying to convince somebody from somewhere else to move up here for our winters sometimes isn't always the easiest thing to do. And the two biggest single impacts to our continued growth in North Dakota are workforce and affordable housing. And we need to work to streamline the process to make sure the federal government doesn't cause problems while you're in the process. Whether I've been talking to construction companies out west, people at the research facility in Langdon, and we just need to streamline this process and allow for illegal immigration to move forward, or legal immigration to move forward.
Okay. Time is fleeting. I need to go to our closing statements. Max Schneider is first.
Well, Dave, thank you again for moderating tonight, and thank you, Kelly, for agreeing to debate, as you always have. We've had a good discussion about policy here tonight, but more than changing any one policy, there's the need to change politics in this country. You heard me mention earlier in the debate, if you look at Congress, it's absolutely dysfunctional. And one of the reasons why it's dysfunctional is because you have left-wing members from left-wing districts, right-wing members from right-wing districts, and there's very few in the middle to compromise and move our country forward. Well, if I'm fortunate enough to be given the job of representing North Dakota in Congress, my approach is going to be a very old-fashioned one. I will work with President Trump, Republicans, Democrats, and anybody in between when it comes to advancing the best interests of our state. And that's really the choice that North Dakotans face. Someone who is going to be loyal to the administration, even on policies that hurt North Dakota, like health care, like standing up for our family farmers, like trade policies. But if you're looking for someone who is going to work with anyone to put North Dakota first, if you're looking for someone who's going to have North Dakota's back, well, I'd be honored to receive your vote.
All right, Kelly Armstrong.
Yeah, this election's important, and the contrast between us couldn't be more different. I have a proven record of lowering taxes, reasonable regulatory reform, and getting results, and working with anybody to do those things. And let's not make any mistake about this. Mac is not some independent moderate. During his time in the legislature, he was a partisan Democrat. In fact, in 2016, the voters who knew him best determined he was too liberal to represent us in Bismarck and voted against him. And now he's asking the rest of North Dakota to vote for him and send him to Washington, D.C. I said it earlier, and I'm going to say it again. Past performance is the best predicator of future results. And I will put our records together, and I will stand on my record every day from now until Election Day. North Dakota deserves a strong, effective leader who's passionate about public service and will go to work every day to ensure North Dakota maintains the place to be a great place to do business and a great place to raise a family.
Well, I'd like to thank both candidates, Kelly Armstrong and Mac Schneider, for a spirited yet respectful debate. Thank you both so much. Thanks to AARP for helping to co-sponsor these debates, and thanks to you for tuning in. For Prairie Public, I'm Dave Thompson. Remember to vote in November.
Funding for Election 2018 coverage is provided in part by AARP, a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership association, 88,000 strong in North Dakota, creating real possibilities right here in North Dakota, and by the members of Prairie Public.